Are you stuck in the energy crash cycle, fighting fatigue, sugar cravings, stubborn weight, and constant health worries? Here's the real reason. Up to 88% of American adults are suffering from hidden insulin resistance. It's the silent trigger behind weight gain, low energy, high blood pressure, inflammation, skin tags, diabetes, and more. But you can break out without extreme diets or prescriptions. Introducing the Feel Great Protocol, a simple, science-backed, two-step daily system that's already transforming thousands of lives. Step 1. Unimate, a potent yerba mate extract clinically proven to boost mood, sharpen focus, and help your body burn fat. Step 2. Balance, a patented fiber matrix you take before meals. It helps flatten blood sugar spikes, crushes cravings, and supports a healthy insulin response. No gimmicks, no guesswork, just real results. If you struggle with weight, fatigue, sugar cravings, blood sugar, diabetes, inflammation, or other health issues, this is your invitation to feel great again. Your health comes first, protected with our 90-day money-back guarantee. Head over to patriotspecial.com. That's patriotspecial.com. It's time to feel great and reclaim your health.
My name is Ari. I'm from California. I had not told anybody that I was pre-diabetic. My doctors were telling me like, hey, we need to start considering medicine for you. And I was so ashamed. I was like, no, I'm going to pretend this doesn't exist. This isn't real. And maybe I'll get away from it somehow. I kind of put some blind faith in it when I started. Within a month and a half, I went from pre-diabetic to just back in the green with my blood work. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't even just my blood work. I mean, my glucose and everything was incredible. My clothes were fitting different and I was starting to lose weight and inches. And on top of that, since December, I have lost 40 pounds officially. Nothing has worked like this. I've been on keto, multiple kinds of different diets. I'm enjoying just doing things normally. I'm getting healthy while living my life. And that's what I love about it.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Patriot Underground. Today is November 19th, 2025. Thank you so much for joining me, folks, to discover the truth beneath the surface. As always, I really do appreciate everybody out there taking the time to listen. And at long last, tonight, I am finally going to provide a solo situation update. I know it's been a really long time. I thank you for you folks being patient with me. But I want to talk about the landscape that we're all navigating together as the fifth generation war rages on. And my primary focus is to once again remind folks out there what the objectives of this war actually are in an effort to separate the end game from all the noise and to clarify the reasons that the battlefield has become increasingly obscured the deeper we get into the operation. Now, obviously, all eyes are on the Epstein Files Transparency Act after it surprisingly sailed through the Senate yesterday and it's ready to be signed into law by President Trump. And certainly we all know by now that there is a provision in the bill allowing Pam Bondi to redact information on the grounds of both national security and ongoing investigations. But it's also important to point out that the language specifies that this is, quote, provided that such withholding is narrowly tailored and temporary. So what this means essentially is that the law mandates that we, the people, cannot be continually kept in the dark. And in the interest of providing more clarity for folks, let me break it down a bit further and explain in more detail. So the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which is House Resolution 4405, mandates the Department of Justice to publicly release all unclassified records related to Jeffrey Epstein's investigations. And not only that, his prosecutions, his flight logs, his communication, and his death within 30 days of enactment, or 15 days for the initial House-passed version. So this includes names of government officials, it includes public figures, foreign dignitaries, anybody who is referenced in connection with Epstein's activities. And what I'm going to do now is break down the key provisions on redactions. So this bill explicitly prohibits redactions or withholding of documents based on, quote, embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity to any individual or entity, including powerful figures. This is a core transparency safeguard designed to prevent selective censorship. However, there are limited redactions which are permitted in narrowly defined cases to protect privacy, safety, and of course the legal processes that might be ongoing. So we've got a couple of different examples of those. Victim and child witness protection. Obviously, personally identifiable information from the victim's personal or medical files or anything constituting a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. Child sex abuse material must be withheld entirely. That's something that we all expected. We also have provisions in there for active investigations or prosecution. So information that could jeopardize ongoing federal cases can be redacted, but only if the redaction is, quote, narrowly tailored and temporary. And then, of course, there's national security. The classified materials can be redacted or withheld, though the Attorney General must declassify to the maximum extent possible and provide an unclassified summary of any withheld portions. So this is really big, folks. All redactions must include a written justification published in the Federal Register and reported to Congress. Within 15 days of release, the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, must submit a detailed report to the House and Senate Judiciary Committees listing categories of released versus withheld materials, a summary of redactions, including the legal basis, and an unredacted list of all government officials, public figures, and foreign dignitaries named in the files. So even though redactions are likely, the language of the law stipulates that they must be narrow, specific, and they must require public justification. And I actually interpret that as a good thing. It's a clear indication that whatever information is withheld from the American people must be clearly articulated and that the rationale must be fully transparent and credible. So I'm cautiously optimistic that the passing of this bill will set in motion the process of disclosure that we've been anxiously anticipating for years now. Having said that, when Pam Bondi was asked about the Epstein Files Transparency Act today, this is how she responded.
Investigation by the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney prevent the department from releasing all of the remaining files?
So we have released over 33,000 Epstein documents to the Hill, and we'll continue to follow the law and to have maximum transparency. Also, we will always encourage all victims to come forward.
What are the next steps, Madam Attorney General, for the DOJ regarding what we assume President Trump will sign into law with the Epstein files? Is this going to be on the Justice Department website? What are you doing here over the next 30 days as we understand it?
We will continue to follow the law with maximum transparency while protecting victims.
Yeah. When you say follow the law, Madam Attorney General, do you mean that you will provide all the files by 30 days?
We will follow the law. The law passed both chambers last evening. It has not yet been signed, but we will continue to follow the law, again, while protecting victims, but also providing maximum transparency.
Madam Attorney General, the DOJ statement earlier this year saying that the files would not release mentioned the fact that the review of the documents and the evidence did not suggest that any additional investigation of third parties was warranted. What changed since then that you launched this investigation?
Information that has come for information. There's information new information, additional information. And again, we will continue to follow the law, to investigate any leads. If there are any victims, we encourage all victims to come forward, and we will continue to provide maximum transparency under the law.
Wedding, Madam General. On Ryan Wedding, you mentioned, Madam Attorney General, the
The issue with the new information that you just indicated is the department seeking information perhaps from the Epstein estate because Mr. Blanche did not have that information when he interviewed Ghislaine Maxwell? What new information, and would you limit the new investigation to just those named persons that the president talked about, or is this a broad, open-ended investigation?
I would refer to the Deputy Attorney General's post that he put out on X, and we're not going to say anything else on that because now it is a pending investigation in the Southern District of New York.
So as you can see, folks, she appears to be almost like a deer in headlights, signaling some pretty heavy redactions. Maximum transparency, which you mentioned about 5 times in that clip, along with continuing to follow the law, is not synonymous with full disclosure. I think we all know that. And notice that she mentioned new information prompted a reopened probe in the Southern District of New York, reversing the DOJ's July 2025 conclusion that no further investigation was needed. And then when she was pressed, she said, we're not going to say anything else on that because it is now a pending investigation. So in my opinion, folks would be wise to not celebrate prematurely. And indeed, I've made that mistake plenty of times, as my followers know. However, this is a massive step in the right direction, as well as a further indicator that the White Hats intend to continue scripting the maximum amount of drama surrounding Epstein before they finally drop the hammer. And we also have to remember what Q told us: think logically, the only way is the military. So what's happening here, folks, is that the normies, the target audience, are getting an up-close and personal crash course on how the justice system is designed to insulate the elite. And I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if there are more rug pulls in store for all of us before this comes out. Not only that, I also stand by my theory that both Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, who is just standing there kind of creepily staring into space, are playing the role of the villain for the purposes of exposing that truth to the American people. But what's important is that more people than ever before are now following this story. Eyes are on. That's what we've been saying all along. That's the whole purpose of all of this drama. Folks are demanding justice. And that is indeed what we need to be focused on. Now, in addition to that, we also heard reports that the House is actually going after Epstein's financial records with JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank. And I think there was another major institution. I can't recall off the top of my head. And as I posted last night, what happens when that string gets pulled? The entire banking system gets exposed and subsequently will probably collapse under the weight of that exposure. And incidentally, ISO 222 is going to be implemented officially. The deadline is November 22nd, which just so happens to be the anniversary of the assassination of JFK. So the pieces on the chessboard appear to be coming together quite nicely. But at the same time, like I said, I am not developing any expectations. We know where we're headed, but none of us can accurately predict how we're going to get there and what the ETA looks like. So with that said, let's zoom out a little bit here and let's talk about the big picture, because that's really what I want to focus on tonight. I want to remind everybody listening that Q told us back in December of 2019 in drop 3673 that it was over before it began, right after telling us that there are no coincidences. And in my opinion, that is the most important thing that all of us need to remember as we continue to hold the line through all the chaos and confusion, recognizing that all of it has been engineered for reasons which I'm going to outline here tonight. And certainly these are concepts that you've heard me discuss before, but it's very important to revisit them at certain points along the way of the journey. And I happen to think this is one of them. So I'm not going to make any predictions about what's going to happen with the Epstein files or any of the other events that we're anticipating. But rather, my aim is to underscore the importance of what our role is moving forward. And in the process, to provide some clarity about the overall landscape as a means to dispel a lot of the black pilling and confusion that so many folks out there are struggling with, quite frankly. Now, regardless of whatever twists and turns the movie takes from here on out, including and especially with regard to the Epstein drama, it is more critical than ever to remain focused on the big picture, which you often hear me characterize as the overall trajectory of this operation. And I say that with the utmost respect for my audience, recognizing that we are all battling the fatigue of this process, and we have been for a very long time. We are indeed seeing things get crazier with every passing day, but this was not unanticipated. You made it very clear that the deeper we get, the more unreal it all becomes. The choice to know will be yours. The ending will not be for everyone. And that's a drop that I'm going to revisit in a little while and put into proper context as a way of underscoring my firm belief that we have entered into the final stages of the plan, something that Trump indicated in a Truth Social post not too long ago. The third act of this epic drama is going to end with tears of joy, with people dancing in the street, with celebration all throughout the world as our collective liberation is finally realized by all, and everybody completely understands what Trump meant when he said the golden age has already begun. In my opinion, we are rapidly advancing toward the eye of the storm as we continue to witness the manufactured division that seems to be everywhere at this point. Most noticeably, by observing the perceived rift within the conservative movement over the Israel question. And we're seeing manifestations of this central issue everywhere, including, of course, with the Epstein files. And what's amazing to me, and I say this with all due respect, what's amazing to me is that so many people are continually falling into the psyop rather than being able to objectively observe all of this drama and to understand that this is all part of the operation. But it's also not surprising when you consider all that we've been through and the exhaustion, the emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion that set in a long time ago. It just keeps building with every passing day. It continues to deepen the longer it takes for all this stuff to play out. I get it. I'm sympathetic to it, mostly because I've experienced it myself. And if you've been following me for a while, you know that. I've been very transparent about it. At the end of the day, we're all human. But having said that, it is my firm belief that we have to be constantly mindful of the fact that we were called to transcend our own imperfections. We were called to rise to the occasion and to be something more, quite frankly, than any of us thought we would ever be. And I don't think that's hyperbolic. Each of us were given the responsibility of digital soldiers who have to dig deep within ourselves to find the clarity, to find the will to fight on, even when the impulse to walk away temporarily takes over, even when in our darkest moments we want to flip over the table in frustration. We all have to remember why we're here. And that is because we were divinely chosen to hold the line, to be a beacon of hope and optimism throughout this process. Black pilling is our worst enemy. And while Q warned us to be careful who we follow, and that is part of the problem, I personally am convinced that the biggest threat is that which comes from within, given the fact that we are engaged in a spiritual war, facing an enemy that is not going to go down without a fight. And that resistance, quite frankly, folks, is being directed by the devil himself. None of us can avoid being subjected to all of the negativity out there. But at the end of the day, we have a choice to either be what we were called to be or to wallow in pessimism and negativity and to drag other people down in the process. And I, for one, even though I'm not perfect, I, for one, will always choose and have always chosen the former and not the latter. if I'm not a force of optimism and clarity and hope, then I might as well have never picked up the microphone. God prompted me for a reason. And I've never, ever forgotten that, nor should any of you. Our job is to be a bridge for others, a rock-solid foundation on which people who feel lost can seek clarity. We didn't come this far and build this knowledge base that God sent us out into the wilderness to discover and to share with others just so that we could tear it all down when times got tough. Soldiers don't give up, ever. And there's one thing I know about myself, and I learned it long before I ever started this journey. I get knocked down, but I get up every single time. Because I would rather stand for something that I believe in and die, if necessary, to protect it, than to be a doomer and a coward in the face of adversity. But honestly, folks, I'm not here to judge anyone but myself. I speak directly from the heart, and I speak with passion about our sacred purpose. The weight that we all feel isn't lost on me. And I'm not here to minimize it, but rather my purpose is to urge everybody out there to remember what we're here to do. And in recent weeks, I've been thinking a lot about this, reflecting quite a bit. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that the skewed perception of many people in our community is the result of the battle fatigue more than anything else. Everybody is really struggling right now, given the constant bombardment of repetitive, seemingly endless psyops. The resolve and even the faith of so many folks out there is being tested like never before. And that's why the job of anons has never been more important than it is now. That's the whole reason, the whole purpose for this military-civilian alliance. With all the perceived division within MAGA right now, we really need to stop and examine what's actually going on, because I find that in times like these, it is absolutely vital to cut through all of the noise and to focus on the objectives of the mission. That's the only thing that really matters. And as I've been saying all along, we are in the midst of an exposure operation being conducted on the plane of fifth-generation warfare, which is entirely based upon deception. Now, I fully admit that I did not anticipate the type of optics that we've experienced, and certainly the ones that we're experiencing right now. But I also have to be honest that that's been the case all along. I mean, sure, we've made many predictions in the past. Some of them turned out to be accurate, but we've also been wrong many times. And that really doesn't matter all that much. What matters is not falling into the trap of developing expectations. Because each and every time, we always experience a rug pull when we begin to think that we have our finger on the pulse of where the white hats are taking us, which direction they're going to go in this scripted movie. And I'm going to put a finer point on why that is. Folks, throughout the course of this journey, the wisest amongst us have begun to expect the unexpected. And not only that, and perhaps even more importantly, we now recognize that when the operation takes a surprising twist, it's not something to get upset about. It's actually an indication, foreshadowing that more events are going to play out, which in retrospect, we'll come to realize had to happen the way they did in order to be effective. So having laid that out, I want to read a post that I wrote a couple of days ago that I think encapsulates the essence of the message that I aim to deliver to you folks tonight. And then we can elaborate a little bit more on the 40,000-foot view, and in the process, dispel the black pills that are being sold all over social media. So let's take a look. You are kidding yourself if you think the operation isn't going exactly according to plan. Remember what you've learned about the art of war. Appear weak when you're strong. Appear divided when you're united. Make a sound in the east and then strike in the west. Confusion and manufactured division are necessary to camouflage where the next moves are coming from. Nobody has successfully predicted the way this operation would play out, and that is exactly why it has been so successful. This is fifth generation war, the art of misdirection. Don't get drawn into the movie. Instead, recognize nothing is as it seems. It had to be this way, and the war is not over yet. The cleanup of the lower tier of the cabal, while simultaneously breaking down the matrix by forcing people to talk about the subjects that actually matter, are the hardest parts of the operation, which is why the fog of war is thickening. The white hats are forcing the spotlight to exactly where it needs to be in order to manipulate the minds of the, quote, target audience on both the left and right. It is vital to recognize that the false political paradigm of Democrat versus Republican is eroding in the process. As all of this continues to play out, people are focusing less on partisan politics and more on the core issues that have both weaponized the system against we the people and prevented our elected officials from actually representing us and not special interests. That's what unity looks like, folks, even if it has the appearance of division. Don't worry about Trump playing golf with Lindsey Graham, disavowing Marjorie Taylor Greene, or the optics of his pro-Israel administration. Rather, ask yourself, if Trump were really on the side of the Zionists and the neocons, if he were truly aligned with the deep state, would we be having an Israel first versus America first battle within the MAGA movement and even more broadly across the political spectrum? Wouldn't that power have been used to shift attention away from the one issue, the one subject that we have never been able to have an honest conversation about? And even though we're seeing the optics of an attempt to censor, isn't it rather obvious that the voices grow louder as time goes on? Wouldn't the Epstein issue be memory hold by now? And yet so many people are bewildered by how Trump is operating. Here's what they fail to grasp. From the moment he descended the escalator, Trump was characterized as one of the most divisive figures in history by the mainstream media, and in accordance with the principles of Sun Tzu. The white hats have used that to their advantage. And that is why he positions himself on the wrong side of an issue, to draw those who perceive him as the enemy to the right side without them ever even realizing how they're being manipulated. This is all tactical maneuvering. It's not about taking sides or getting caught up in perceived loyalties. All that is just optics to advance the true objectives of the mission. First, you engineer division on an issue to highlight the problem, and then you expose the truth. And you win the hearts and minds of the people. All of this is playing out with military precision. Meanwhile, the RICO Grand Conspiracy is gradually coming into the light. With every passing day, the military is deploying, and the indictments have already begun. We are winning. The boomerangs will return, no matter how convoluted the chessboard may seem. All this was planned long ago. And that is why Q told us, deeper we go, the more unrealistic it all becomes. The end won't be for everyone. That choice to know will be yours. Choosing to know means trusting the plan. It's that simple. The white hats have this all mapped out, and the hammer will drop at exactly the right time, not a second before. Disclosure and accountability are coming, but not in accordance with our timeline or expectations. In the meantime, take a breath and allow yourself to rise above the noise. Don't focus on the optics. Focus on the subjects that aren't going away. Israel, Epstein, and the demand for justice. And then I ended by saying nothing can stop what's coming. This is the art of war playing out, folks. Appear weak and divided when the opposite is true. Now, I had an overwhelmingly positive response to that post, not because it was anything brilliant or groundbreaking, but rather because it is the truth. And people not only recognized it, but appreciated the reminder of what our role is in this operation and what this mission is all about. So let's break this down a little bit further. The White Hats, if nothing else, planned this script fully anticipating that anons and the enemy would be constantly attempting to figure out the next move. And consequently, they needed to be sure to throw innumerable curveballs in our direction to keep us off the scent of the correct sequence of events. Why? Well, for operational security. It seems to me that should be rather obvious, and yet so many people out there approach their analysis focusing on the optics rather than the final objectives, which were made abundantly clear in the drops, chief among them being unity amongst the people around core principles. Now, the way I see it, having already removed the top and the middle tier of the cabal, that hierarchy, there are two primary objectives that are currently playing out at the same time, both of which require these very frustrating but entirely necessary and indeed repetitive psyops in order to achieve ultimate victory. And again, I do believe we are closing in on the final stages, given the fact that so much of the battlefield has become obscured by the events which have played out recently. So what are these objectives? Number one, clearing up the remnants of the cabal. Number two, continuing to educate the vast majority of the population about our common enemy through this ongoing simulation. And honestly, folks, as I stated earlier, this is the most difficult part of the operation. The lower tier of the cabal is by far the largest amount of individuals that need to be brought to justice. The hidden elites at the top, and even their mid-level controllers, were relatively easy to remove from the chessboard covertly and either put under submission and force them to play a role or replace them with actors. But there are literally millions of people who are part of this criminal network, the lower level, that need to be taken down overtly. And at the same time, there are millions of people, normies, that need to be red-pilled in the process. My friend Lewis Herms, during our last discussion, pointed this out. He said the cabal was taken down behind the scenes from the top down, but the optics of the public reveal are from the bottom up. The total reversal. So there is indeed a mop-up operation that is very kinetic and very real to round up all of their foot soldiers. It's ongoing. It's playing out in real time as the script writers at Forepog continue to engage the normies with the psychological operations that we've been subjected to in order to force critical thinking. So when people ask the question, why are we continually being subjected to all of these mind games? The answer is relatively simple. Because it's the only effective way to keep what remains of the enemy off guard, and also to infuse cognitive dissonance into the minds of the population at a level sufficient to break their programming and to shatter the matrix. All of which has to be done artfully, delicately, and quite frankly, with military precision. And that is the reason why things seem so chaotic at this point. Most of us anticipated that we would see this play out in a different way. myself included. But we've all come to learn that the unbelievable progress that's been made up until this point would not have been possible were it done according to our preferences. In other words, folks, to put it simply, don't let the optics convince you not to stay the course. Don't allow your own cognitive dissonance to cause you to lose sight of the big picture, of the objectives of the mission, which I just outlined. And expect things to get a lot crazier before we see how the White Hats plan to untie this knot. Just because we can't make sense of what's happening at any given moment, we can never afford to forget that that is a sign that the good guys are actually in control. And they're keeping the remnants of the enemy off guard while the remainder of this war plays out and while all the normies are being prompted to wake up. We're not supposed to be able to figure out what the next moves are. And even when we reach a low point, when it feels on an emotional level, because we all know about emotions and what Q told us, right? When it seems like we're moving in the wrong direction or we're not moving at all, what happens every single time? The boomerang always comes back around. And we continue to see more exposure, more concrete steps toward justice. It's always the optics that folks get concerned about. When we look at Kash Patel contradicting himself over Epstein, or Pam Bondi for that matter, or either one of them calling for censorship, or appearing to stonewall the wheels of justice, when we see Trump optically siding with Israel, when we see him lash out against Marjorie Taylor Greene, when he appears to be on the wrong side of the will of the people, we have to remember that all of this is being done strategically in order to use Trump's persona as a fifth-generation weapon. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, every time he makes a statement, every move that he makes, every posture in a certain direction should serve as a reminder that we are engaged in asymmetrical warfare. Because Trump is the lightning rod. It's critical to understand that all of these illusions that are being created are not only being done for tactical reasons, but they're also continuing to set the stage for more unexpected twists that are ultimately going to liberate humanity fully from this enemy mindset that's enslaved us for generations. That's why we constantly say this is a war for your mind. Trump is using all of these scenarios. And by the way, he's also using individuals who he claims to be ideologically opposed to in order to attack the enemy in ways that he cannot yet do openly. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massey, even people like Nick Fuentes, who I mentioned with Mike the other night. And on that note, let's take a look at this clip.
Carlson recently had a friendly interview with anti-Semite Nick Fuentes. Tucker Carlson. What role do you think Tucker Carlson could play in the Republican Party, the conservative movement?
Well, I found him to be good. I mean, he said good things about me over the years. I think he's good. We've had some good interviews. I did an interview with him where we had 300 million hits. You know that. Look, I can't tell him. Will you let me finish my statement? You are the worst. You're with Bloomberg, right? You are the worst. I don't know why they even have you. We've had some great interviews with Tucker Carlson, but you can't tell him who to interview. I mean, if he wants to interview Nick Fuentes, I don't know much about him, but if he wants to do it, get the word out. Let him, people have to decide. Ultimately, people have to decide.
So do we really think that Trump doesn't know much about Nick Fuentes? You love him, you hate him, it doesn't really matter. He is rapidly becoming one of the most talked about figures in America. And primarily for criticizing the Israel first posture under Trump of the U.S. government. So when the president of the United States even mentions his name, who benefits? What effect does it have? Millions more people are going to listen to his podcast, and they're going to be educated about the central problem that's affecting us all. It's the same reason that Tucker had him on and that countless others have been attacking both of them. It's all about drawing attention. Trump attacks using his proxies, folks. And notice he said it's important to get the word out and that people need to decide for themselves. Well, isn't that what this is all about at the end of the day? Our president understands that all of this is just free publicity. And in an information war, you amplify ideas that you want people to rally around by reverse engineering the method of attack. And in the process, retain the all-important plausible deniability and appear optically to distance yourself from the concepts that would be counterproductive to openly support at this stage of the game. This is how the white hats operate. They create the optics of division using figures like Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massey. The list goes on and on and on to articulate the real problem. While Trump appears opposed in order for his persona, this is what I was talking about before, to function as the lightning rod to bring attention to the narrative that the white hats want circulating in the digital public square. And in my opinion, all of these individuals are part of the operation, whether they're consciously aware of it or not. They may be reading off the script, or they may be compartmentalized. Heck, they might even be functioning organically, but they're still being used to advance the Overton window. The Q operation anticipated all of this, just as they anticipated people like myself. Ordinary voices becoming focal points, creating communities to guide their followers through this process as the war rages on. And indeed it does. So it's absolutely critical to understand that even though the white hats are in full control militarily, there are vast numbers of individuals that still need to be swept up in mass arrests. 600,000 sealed indictments. We're talking about millions of people across the world. And in addition to that, of course, millions more on top of that that need to be gradually and systematically led in the direction of what appears to be an organic awakening. And we've discussed that many times in the past. So I would advise everybody out there listening right now to ignore what you've been seeing, what you've been hearing all over social media. That there appears to be this massive portion of Trump's base that's turned their back on him. Or these fake polls that are suggesting that he's lost 50% of his support over the last year, particularly amongst young voters. And that there's this massive fissure within the political spectrum of the conservative movement, that MAGA is dead. Oh, my goodness. It's all smoke and mirrors. None of it's real. What we should be focusing on instead is what that apparent division centers around. Is MAGA all about America first or Israel first? And by the way, what country was it that Q told us was being saved for last? Oh, right, Israel. What is the one subject that nobody can escape? No matter where they go, no matter where they look, people are talking about Israel. And of course, Epstein is an extension of that. We have to understand that they are creating the conditions for this conversation to explode into the narrative space, and that has been the objective all along. And that's why I began the show tonight by explaining that the optics aren't what anons are supposed to be focused on. Sure, we can observe them, we can analyze them to a certain extent, but not to the detriment of remembering what the big picture is, what the real objectives of the mission are. And of course, the all-important question of what is everybody talking about? What are the issues that won't go away? And of course, cui bono. If you scroll through social media right now, All that's being discussed is Israel, Epstein, and the demand for arrests. People are learning the truth. They're demanding justice. They're demanding transparency from the government. And even though Trump appears to be on the wrong side of his base in certain areas, for the reasons I just laid out for everybody, I'll remind folks this isn't all about Trump. This is about the Great Awakening. And there's no denying that people are more awake than they've ever been. Why can I make that assertion despite still being surrounded by normies? Well, people don't demand justice and transparency and disclosure if they're asleep, if they're not paying attention to what's going on. That is the barometer that we need to use to measure the progress and the effectiveness, the ultimate success of the operation. Of course, I've said it over and over, there is no victory without justice. But I believe 117% that we are going to get justice. And all of this is being done as a lead-in. It's frustrating, I know. But the fact of the matter is, folks, is that we have to practice a certain level of acceptance and understanding. It's not about us. It's not about Trump. It's about the big picture of unifying humanity around knowledge of this common enemy. And we are getting closer and closer and closer for that big icebreaker moment that we've all been waiting for. You can feel it. And as I mentioned earlier, the false left-right paradigm is dissolving as anger and confusion increase. And this is central to the objective of achieving unification in opposition to the system of corruption and evil that is being propped up in this scripted movie to show the people and to galvanize the vast majority of the population. And it is working. The optics of division are camouflaging the real unity that's taking place. The progress toward that unity as a consensus is continually building, where people are pissed and they are demanding transparency. They are demanding accountability. That is ultimately the goal. That is where the White Hats want this to go. We've heard it said a million different times in a million different ways. Trump and the White Hats have to get the people behind them, but they have to do it in a way where people don't realize that they're being manipulated. It has to appear organic. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's not going to stick. That's why Q told us it had to be this way. And while I can't say definitively, nobody can, how all of these complex knots are going to be unraveled, I can confidently argue that they will all boomerang back in due time as more disclosure continues to pour out onto the public consciousness. And at that point, it will provide Trump the necessary optics to pivot at the appropriate moment. We know it's going to happen. We don't know exactly how and when, but we do know it's going to happen. And I continue to suspect that 10/7 exposure, which thousands of Jews in Israel are demanding in the streets every single weekend, is going to be the linchpin that brings down the entire disease temple on its head. Once it becomes widely accepted that BB 2.0 set all of this up to justify the wag the dog war in Gaza, which they're never going to admit was fake, which it doesn't really matter. It's going to be very easy for the United States to disavow Israel. And certainly when it comes out that Epstein was a Mossad asset and that Mossad was above the CIA and controlled not only our government, but our financial system, Hollywood, the music industry, on and on and on, well, that's checkmate. Not only that, I can also anticipate that as the terrorism in the West Bank, the optics of the terrorism in the West Bank continues to get worldwide attention, where the Israelis are gouging out the eyeballs of lambs and pouring concrete in people's wells and beating people. And then you got the Epstein files continuing to capture the interest of the normies. And the overall approval rating of Israel is swirling the toilet bowl. The complexity that so many people out there are struggling with is going to unravel very quickly. And I also wouldn't be surprised if the White Hats eventually reveal that the optics of this Israel first posture were part of a complex sting operation to fully expose Zionist infiltration at all the key nodes of power and control that I just mentioned. I talked about this with Mike the other night. I firmly believe, especially with the Epstein issue, the human trafficking, the pedophilia, the satanic ritual abuse, this comes out, nobody's going to believe that Trump didn't know about it. He can't act as if, oh my God, this is so horrible, I never knew. No one's going to believe that. So to a certain extent, they're going to have to level with the American people. And saying that there was an ongoing investigation, a sting operation, call it what you will, that was happening in the background, and therefore people had to play certain roles in order for all of this to come out and be accepted by the public or something along those lines, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if the White Hats go in that direction. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. But it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong about how we're going to get there or when we're going to get there. Like I said earlier, it's about being able to recognize what the key objectives of the operation are and to be able to hone in on all the indicators that it is, in fact, working. It's also possible that we could see Kash Patel come out and basically say that he had to pose as a victim of blackmail. Or Pam Bondi could be playing a role to make it appear as if she's stonewalling justice on behalf of the enemy because of this sting operation, ongoing investigation, etc., etc. And all of this can come tumbling down in dramatic fashion if it's revealed that it was part of a much larger operation to root out this cancer and all of its tentacles from our political system. So where are we headed from here? It's tough to say with certainty, like I just mentioned a moment ago, but there are a couple of subjects that I wanted to touch upon before we close out the show tonight. So let's talk a little bit about the filibuster. And if you've been following me on X, you know that I've been talking about this a lot lately. Why? Because Trump is pushing it. And we know that when Trump is pushing something, it's for a reason. He made it very clear, even as this government shutdown was going on, which I think in retrospect was intended to expose, amongst other things, the widespread fraud associated with the SNAP program, even that's officially, now that it's officially over, Trump is still saying that we need the filibuster. He's got Caroline Leavitt talking about it on interviews. So why is this so important? Why is the nuclear option key to the path forward? Well, we all know, going back to January, and boy, it's hard to believe that we're getting close to the end of 2025. But Trump signed a whole bunch of executive orders. But at the end of the day, these are essentially policy directives without any teeth. And in order to become law, of course, they have to go through Congress and the Senate. So ending the filibuster is essentially the key that would unlock, and again, we're talking about, the movie, the script, the optics that are being presented here. But the filibuster is the key that would unlock virtually everything that we voted for. And prior to this development of the Epstein Files Transparency Act passing, I would have included that in there as well. And indeed, corrupt judges could, even when Trump signs this, potentially block their release, essentially refusing to comply with the law. And if they did, terminating the filibuster would make it very easy, would streamline the process of impeaching these corrupt officials. And how much have we been talking about judicial tyranny throughout the past year? I mean, my goodness. It's like every other day. Another judge, another rogue judge puts up a roadblock. They all get torn down. But it's all about pattern recognition. They're continuing to show us how this corrupt system works and who it works for. So that would eliminate, if you had the filibuster terminate, you had the nuclear option, that would eliminate yet another barrier that we've been subjected to over and over and over. Now, on the surface, Trump is correct that the rest of his administration hinges entirely upon this one issue, terminating the filibuster. And the conversation itself is functioning as a unifying factor. See, there's that word again, unity. You may not be able to recognize it. It may look like division and chaos. You scratch beneath the surface. You analyze, you apply a little bit of logic and discernment. You realize that all of this is functioning. Everything I've talked about tonight is functioning as a unifying factor, dissolving all of the aforementioned divisions between both parties, or the uniparty. You could just call it that. Why? Because as people continue to suffer and get more and more frustrated and angry, they're no longer concerned about Democrat or Republican, but rather ending the stalling of progress on Trump's agenda, which is another primary reason for this scripted government shutdown. I'll remind folks, I've said it over and over and over again. The White Hats are not only engaged in an exposure operation, but also an education operation. And as some are calling it, like our friend Dave from News Treason, a manufactured consent operation in order to teach the general public the ins and outs of why our legislative system is so broken. That's why Kash Patel said, we are educating the American people. We are laying out the case for the American people. That's why Elon Musk said the only thing that matters, the only court that matters is the court of public opinion. They're telling you what the real objectives are. You just have to be able to listen. And remember what you've learned. If you really look at this from a 40,000 foot view, it's very clear that this is what's going on. The American people provided a mandate in a landslide victory that essentially has not been enacted. And the people are feeling disillusioned and angry and betrayed, and rightfully so for all the normies out there who don't understand the operation. Not my audience, of course. But this aspect of the plan is to essentially reveal the causes for all of their frustration. And again, it's not a partisan debate, but rather an institutional, structural lesson in civics to highlight what the real problem is as it pertains to the relationship between the voters and the government that they elect. And I would even go so far as to say that this scripted scene in the movie to shut down the government and force a national debate about the nuclear option was designed to unify the American people around the idea that the two-party system and these procedural rules within the legislative branch are the reason that life does not get any better for the American people, no matter who they vote for. That's one thing that Democrats and Republicans can basically agree upon. All the people who are at least somewhat sane would probably make that admission. Like, yeah, it doesn't matter who you elect. Things never get better. I mean, you've got the people on the hard right and on the hard left, the sycophants that are, they're going to always toe the party line. But for the average American, this is what really matters. And the natural extension of that is to begin to dissolve the divide between Democrat and Republican in the eyes of the vast majority of the country. Yes, a lot of people just simply vote based upon whether there's a D or an R after the candidate's name. But that's not going to be the case for much longer, folks. by the way, we were told that the Democratic Party, the D Party, will cease to exist. But this is all about getting rid of this false division. But I would argue that a vast majority of the country vote according to whether or not an administration has passed laws and delivered on their promises to improve their lives, particularly when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to financial security, when it comes to foreign policy, domestic issues, social issues, you name it. And while there are varying opinions and disagreements on all of these, when the vast majority of the country votes to go in a certain direction, what we're being shown, that's key, is that it only takes a handful of individuals within the Senate to prevent that agenda from moving forward for partisan reasons. And that should piss people off. I would argue that most Americans would like to see that go away. So that's what's going on here. And all of this corresponds with the Q drops about taking our country back, about returning power to the people. And of course, that has many different meanings and manifestations, as we all know. But it's very applicable to this conversation. The reason that people don't have any power is because of these legislative loopholes that prevent the will of the majority from being enacted into law. The president can only go so far with executive orders. Like Trump said, I'm not a dictator. He said, I'll only be a dictator on day one or something along those lines. But the reality of the matter is he can only go so far. Which, as I stated before, these executive orders, they're just policy directives. In order to codify them, it requires the compliance of other branches of government, particularly the legislative. And we're being shown the problem there, just like we're being shown the problem of judicial tyranny. And again, the reality of the matter is, as this audience knows very well, we are watching a scripted movie, which is why the argument that using the nuclear option would be dangerous, it could blow back on us if Democrats get back into power, I mean, it's a complete fallacy, folks. I probably shouldn't even have to say this, but I'll say it anyway. They certainly would have used it during the Biden administration to enact all of their legislative agendas. And we know the reason that they didn't, because we're already under continuity of government. But you hear some people making this argument, like, oh, it's dangerous to go down that road. Just reminded everybody that the Democratic Party will cease to exist. Not only that, we just had a Delta on election day a couple weeks ago reminding us that elections no longer matter. They're no longer relevant at this point. And that was posted by Q back in 2017. So everything that we're seeing play out, it's all fiction. It's all part of the movie. None of these elections matter. Like Mike King says, Congress probably isn't even in session. We're watching a production. For all we know, it's not even being shot inside of Capitol Hill. So if you add 2 and 2 together, it is quite obvious that there's no actual threat in using the nuclear option, but rather it is the agenda of the White Hats to engineer public opinion and in the process unify the people to support the elimination of this legislative roadblock that prevents action from being taken to benefit the lives of all Americans. That's what people want. That's what people care about. All of Trump's policy initiatives, as outlined by that torrent of executive orders that I referenced a moment ago, early in his third term, are being held up due to the filibuster, which is simply, by the way, a procedural rule. That's all it is. It's not even a law. It's a procedural rule. And it's never been used before, I have to admit. It's never been used before in order to pass legislation. But rather, to speed up presidential appointments and things along those lines. But the point here, folks, is that the public is getting a crash course education on how the government actually works, or perhaps it's more apt to say why the government doesn't work. They're getting an up close and personal view of why the system has failed them. That's what this is all about. So I can see this going either one of two ways. Again, according to the optics of the movie, either eventually there's a breaking point and we get 51 senators who are willing to use the nuclear option, or the rapid devolution process is only going to accelerate into and past the midterms. And I certainly hope it's the former as opposed to the latter, and I think it will be. Based on where we find ourselves at the current moment on the surface, for the rest of Trump's term, we're either going to see the floodgates open in many different ways in terms of implementing his agenda, or we'll essentially be in a position where we're watching everything get worse and worse before the inevitable happens and the military intervention begins. But again, I think it's going to be option A, not option B. But putting that aside, despite the optics, we are on course right now. We are exactly where we are supposed to be. And despite the optics that we are on course right now to watch this play out for the foreseeable future within the civilian system, we also have to remember that Trump, speaking of executive orders, wrote and signed Executive Order 14288 that essentially bridges the gap between the civilian system and the UCMJ. And this is going to become critical as we get closer and closer to the end game, and all of the exposure heats up. The RICO grand conspiracy comes into the light. The Epstein information comes out. The riots that Q talked about in Post 34 that prompt the EBS. This is going to be, in my opinion, the bridge that gets us to military jurisdiction. So this is absolutely critical to keep in mind as we continue to progress toward the end game. Think logically, the only way is the military. But however this goes down, folks, whichever direction the White Hats decide to take us, I want to end tonight by coming full circle with where I began, by making it clear that I trust the plan fully and completely. I anticipate there are going to be more rug pulls. There are going to be more twists in the road before we finally arrive at our destination. But my confidence in this operation and the way that it's playing out has never been higher. And to remind folks that we were destined to walk this path together, not because we weren't up to the task. Think about the enormity of what we're living through. We are documenting the most important and historical times for humanity since God blew breath into Adam's lungs. It's not an exaggeration in any way to characterize this journey and this operation, this war against evil, as biblical. Q did, and for good reason. All right, folks, hopefully you enjoyed this podcast. Please do me a favor and hit that like button and let me know what you thought in the comments. Also, be sure to check out the links in the description so you can support my work. It's a win-win scenario. You can support me and get something amazing in return. Unicity products are absolutely amazing. The Syrona products are fire. Contact Matt Geiger over at Verity Metals. I'm actually going to have him on this coming Saturday. Have another conversation. I'm really looking forward to that. And there are a number of other ways that you can support what I do. Become a member of my locals community. Check out Patriot Underground Switch. Check out Patriot Mobile. I'm telling you, folks, all of these are great opportunities, and I really thank you for all of your support. And for those of you folks who can't support me financially, please just take the time, if you haven't already, to join Rumble, hit that thumbs up, make a comment, and share the podcast everywhere. All right, folks, I will be back soon, but thank you so much for listening. I love you all. God bless and Godspeed, everybody. Patriot out.